Afternoon, Martin.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, appreciate that.
Welcome, everybody, and I'm glad that everyone was able to join us. We did start a little bit later than what we anticipated. We had some technical challenges, but I think we've got all that worked out now. I will call the meeting to order, and the first item on the agenda is disclosures of pecuniary interest. And just for a quick background for the committee members, this because all of you pay taxes, and because all of you, if we increase or decrease any member of council's compensation, there will be a financial implication to each of you. However, it is in common with all of the other members, all of the other taxpayers in the community. So with that respect, there isn't any direct pecuniary interest based on that information. So unless any of you or your members of your immediate family would actually benefit from any decisions that you're going to make, it's unlikely that you would have a pecuniary interest. But we're required through the legislation to ask each and every meeting whether you do or not. So that's the purpose of the item being on the agenda each meeting. And so again, I will ask whether or not anybody has any pecuniary interests.
No.
And seeing none, we can carry on to the next item of the agenda, and that's the election of chair and vice chair. As the terms of reference indicate, we need one member to be able to act as chair. And then of course, in their absence, we need someone who can act as the vice chair. It's just simply a matter of having a brief discussion in advance of the meetings with myself as the clerk to confirm the agenda materials, and then also to actually orchestrate and run the meeting then as we move forward. So we would be looking for a motion from, we would need a mover and a seconder for someone to be appointed as chair. So I would open the floor up to any motions that anyone would like to make. And if it makes it easier, if there's anyone that, I know sometimes it's challenging because you haven't had a lot of discussions, but if it would make it easier, if somebody wanted to volunteer, then some of the others could then move that motion as well. If anybody is interested in chairing the group.
Can I just sorry.
No, please.
We get to that. It was Maureen, I believe. There was another member previously that's
yes.
unable to attend at this time. So that particular position is not being replaced. Like this is the four of us are.
Yeah, the terms of reference indicate a minimum of 3 individuals to be on this group. Because we have 4, I've advised council that Maureen Jenkins was unable to participate now as a result of the delay in us being able to get going. And council is aware of that and hasn't indicated that they wish to replace. They're confident that the 4 of you are going to do the job regardless of whether Maureen was here or not. And they were comfortable with that approach. If, however, if this group feels that there needs to be another individual, we can certainly put that back to council and ask them to consider appointing again. The challenge is that it would also delay, because we really shouldn't move forward with any further deliberations until we had a full committee complement.
No, I was just curious. Sorry, I meant to ask that earlier. That's kind of was my assumption. I just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I probably should have done that as well in the beginning. So
well, I'd like to say that I'm
chair
not,
and a vice chair.
I'm personally not interested. I'll make that open right now.
For my business, I'm afraid I'll have to decline also. Too busy right now. Yeah.
Well, Martin, how are you feeling?
Hey, Martin.
I'm overly interested in being the chair. I've done a little bit of it. I'm not saying I couldn't do it, but I certainly am not.
I nominate Martin.
I wasn't running to the. I'm certainly not running to the.
We're going to operate pretty informally, so, and certainly staff are going to be here to help throughout the process. So I don't want anyone to think that it's a significantly onerous task either. So,
Okay.
I don't think I would mind doing it. I was a little concerned about the time factor, considering some of my other roles with my work. But again, if you're saying you don't think it would be overly onerous and a lot of extra time.
no, and yeah, if I can add a little bit more. And so the role of the chair, primarily because staff will be the ones to be able to pull together resources and documentation, and actually we will pull together the agenda and stuff. There'll be a brief conversation in advance of the meeting just to confirm that we've got everything. That can be done just with a telephone call with myself and the chair. And then it's really just a matter of running the meeting after that. There isn't a whole lot more outside of our meetings that you're probably going to have to worry about.
Okay. I think I'd be willing to try if others, I mean, I don't normally like to elect myself.
May I nominate Susan?
Absolutely. So Martin is moving. Do we have a seconder to have Susan be chair?
I'd second that.
Richard is seconding. And all in favor? Just a show of hands would be great.
All right.
Wonderful. And Susan, you've agreed to accept, so that's fantastic. So Susan, you will be chair. If you wish, I can hand the meeting over to you, or I can finish up with the election of the vice chair and then hand the meeting over to you after that.
Okay, finish with the vice chair.
Okay, so then we're looking for a motion to appoint vice chair. And I'm guessing by the discussions that Martin is probably going to be our vice chair since the other two had graciously declined. So we would look for a motion for that if Martin's agreeable.
Yeah, I can stand for that.
So Kevin is moving.
Mhm.
Can we have a seconder for the motion?
I'll second it.
And Richard seconds. All in favor? It's a show of hands. Wonderful. So we have a chair and vice chair. Congratulations to both of you. And with that, I will turn the rest of the meeting over to Susan, and we will work together through the agenda in that process.
Okay, I'm gonna go back to the agenda here. Just let me pull it up here.
Yep.
So as far as election of chair and vice chair, the next item on the agenda is the committee orientation session, terms of reference, procedural bylaw, conflict of interest act, and confidentiality policy.
Madam
So-
Chair, I can add a little bit more information to that if you wish.
Mhm.
So we have included these 4 items in your agenda package just to provide some background and some context. So the terms of reference for the committee itself are included there. As well, because you're actually a committee of council, we also operate through the council's procedural bylaw, or sections of the procedural bylaw anyway. So that has been included for your reference as to how our meetings and how our agendas are prepared, how we provide notice to the public and things like that. The Conflict of Interest Act is included as legislatively, we're required to provide that, and all committee members are to acknowledge that aspect of it. However, having said that, it's not likely that you will have any perceived conflicts, but again, those are things that you need to just be aware of. And council also has a confidentiality policy. And included in your agenda is a draft form that I realize we're meeting virtually, but if it's possible for each of you to print out that form, or even electronically pull it from the agenda package and sign it. All it's doing is where we go into closed session, where we're dealing with any type of confidential materials, you're just agreeing that you're going to keep them within the context of the committee members and not going to be sharing anything that is intended to be confidential with anybody outside of this group. So that information is just for your own benefit. If you would like, Madam Chair, we can run through the terms of reference a little bit and talk a little bit more about our roles and responsibilities are. Or if the committee members are comfortable with having reviewed it, we can move on as well. I'm at your pleasure.
So how does everyone feel? Have you had a chance to read the terms of reference?
I've read it. It's been a few weeks since I've gone over it.
Right. And Martin?
I've read it. It's pretty detailed. I wouldn't mind having a Coles Notes version of just what's in there, just so that we can all be refreshed.
Sure, Madam Chair, if you'd like, I can just kind of hit the highlights a little bit, and then if there are questions as we go along, please feel free to interrupt me.
I think that's a good idea. That sounds great.
Okay, so the purpose, of course, is to review the remuneration and benefits that are currently paid to members of council and to recommend any changes that you think should be implemented. And I think the important thing here is to note, if necessary, you may at the end of your deliberations determine that everything is fine and the current compensation package that council has is appropriate, and that's perfectly acceptable as well. You may make a decision that it should be lower, you may make a decision that it should be higher, or there should be an entirely different mechanism for how they're compensated. So there is no right or wrong answer. It's as individuals, as the committee, you just need to determine what you think is appropriate, and then we'll be reporting back to council on that. So there, under guiding principles, there's a number of things that that we need to keep in mind when you're considering different types of compensation packages. So one, is it fair and reasonable, and will it attract a good, diverse, representative pool of candidates from our residents that wish to seek election to council? And recognizes that the work of the mayor and the council is demanding and important, and that they should be appropriately compensated for that work. Recognize the complexity, the responsibilities, and the time commitments of both the roles of mayor and council. And that not only that, but it should be appropriate when you put it into comparison to the average full-time wage within the community. So we're not suggesting necessarily that we're looking to compensate everybody $50,000 or $60,000 a year, because that's a full-time wage. But and our council members are part-time. But I think the other thing you want to keep in mind, though, is that you want it to be reflective. So if the average income of a full-time person in Malahide was $30,000 and council was part-time, you would make your judgment based on a lower part-time wage. If our community was such that the average wage was $150,000 a year, you would increase that part-time wage so that it was somewhat representative of what our community typically would earn. So as I said, we're not looking at having it at a full-time wage, but just take in mind what the average wage of our local residents would probably be, and give some thought to that. Again, probably one of the other things that you may hear from other members of the public is we want to demonstrate fiscal responsibility. So we're not looking to put an increased burden on our taxpayers either. So we need to make sure that we look at balancing all of those principles. So this particular group, under the mandate, it's to produce a final report with any recommendations regarding a total compensation package for council for this term. And then as well, we're going to take into consideration comparisons with similar sized and neighboring municipalities, because we want to be reflective of our peers and our other local organizations. And that final report and recommendation will be prepared and then will be presented to council for consideration. So I want to make it clear that while this committee is being asked to look at this and to give consideration and to make a final report and recommendations, this committee does not have the authority and to actually implement, of course, any of the recommendations. It'll be recommendations to council, and council will determine at that point in time whether they think that they're going to agree or disagree with any or all of the recommendations of this committee. So you may decide that everyone needs to have their salaries cut in half or need to have their salaries doubled. But at the end of the day, it's still council's decision to be able to make that final determination. So you're providing advice and recommendations, but I want everyone to understand that your advice and recommendations may or may not be adopted by council, either in part or in full at the end of the day. So just want to highlight that as well. Under the scope of the review, I think, again, we've probably hit on most of it, but we want to make sure that the level of compensation is appropriate, and you want to consider not just the base salary of council, but you want to take into consideration any other benefits or reimbursements for expenditures. So included in the package, and we'll get to it later on in the agenda, there is information about different other types. So mileage payments, for example, there are other types of per diems for different types of out-of-town events and things. So it's not just the base salary. You want to look at the whole compensation package and make sure that all of those areas are appropriate. And we'll get to that as we move forward in our deliberations. I think the other parts of that we've touched on. So as I indicated a few moments ago, the minimum membership is 3 citizen members with at least 1 having business representation within the community. And this complement does address all of those. There is, each committee meeting will be attended by myself and or the deputy clerk as well, to provide you with that staff resource and to assist you in your deliberations. We're hoping,
Excuse me, Michelle, sorry. Deputy, is Diana deputy?
I'm sorry, yes. Diana Wilson, who doesn't have her camera on at the moment. She did have it on earlier, but she thought it'd be easier for the discussions if you could see each other. But yes, Diana is the other one. So excuse me, if for whatever reason I'm not able to attend, Diana will, and we'll be able to help you with the deliberations in that context.
Okay. Thank you.
So we are looking at hopefully discussion and debate in the short term. And unfortunately, as a result of COVID, we've had to delay the start of this, this group. But the idea was that our recommendations and report could be submitted to council, hopefully later this fall, so that decisions with regard to changes in compensation could be reflected in next year's budget. So we're hoping that we can, although it's taken us a while to get going, maybe we can tighten up the committee meetings and try to get through this sooner rather than later in order to facilitate. It's not mandatory, and if we have to stretch in for whatever reason to pass the fall, then that's what we, in order to do a thorough job, that's the most important. But if we can, we would like to see something a little bit quicker in terms of recommendations, if that's an option. I think most of the other parts in there is pretty straightforward. This group will continue to meet until that final report and recommendations is submitted to council, and then it will be automatically disbanded. Quorum for meeting purposes. So we have 4 members of the committee. Quorum represents 50% plus 1, rounded to the nearest number. So in order to have a bona fide meeting with a proper quorum, there has to be at least 3 members in attendance. So I know in some instances, some people think that, well, as long as half the people are there, but in this particular case, it's 50% plus 1. So we would be looking at least 3 members. So if for whatever reason you're unable to attend a meeting, the earlier you can let us know, the better, so that we make sure that we always have at least 3 in attendance if somebody else is unable to participate. We will set up, to the best of our ability, a meeting schedule that works for everyone. While this particular meeting is being held during the day, and I'll be very candid, that's staff's preference because it means less after-hour sessions for us. But if that doesn't work for the committee members, we are able to meet after hours for sure. We want to make sure that we're able to facilitate any needs for the committee. And so if there is issues or concerns with certain days, certain times, things like that, let us know. And ideally at the end of this meeting, before we adjourn, we'll set the meeting for we'll set the date and time for the next meeting, and while we've got everybody together, because it's been a little bit of a challenge as well, trying to accommodate everybody's schedules. So
I say something, please?
Mhm.
Sorry.
Please.
I have an appointment at 11 o'clock at Johnny's Restaurant. They're doing renovations in the place, and I'm a little late, so the chair will fill me in. Okay? No problem?
Thank you. And I apologize for the late start today.
There-
Just take that out, please. Sorry about that.
No, quite all right. So the rest of the terms of reference are pretty straightforward. Diana is here, she's taking minutes. And so they will all be also at the end of our session, once the minutes are completed, we will be forwarding them on to council for their information. So they will continue to be aware of our activities and our discussions. The agenda, of course, is prepared 3 or 4 days in advance of and distributed in advance of the meeting. We also post it on our website, so any members of the public are aware that we're meeting, see what the type of information we're discussing, and then if they want to, after this meeting, we've talked about potentially moving back to in-person meetings, so some members of the public would be able to attend the meeting and be able to view it, our discussions, and be part of it in that process. So those are all taken care of. I think the rest of the stuff is pretty straightforward. And unless the committee has any other questions, I think that's all I have with respect to the terms of reference, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. I do have one question, and it's a rather broad one, but just in looking over this, a little bit more of a history. What was done in the past? Has there been a similar committee in the past to review compensation?
I'm not aware that there has been any type of committee like this. I know that in my experience, this has been done in many other communities over the last number of years, but I don't believe this has ever occurred in Malahide before. The councils have typically in the past asked staff to conduct a survey of area municipalities and similar size municipalities, and then have kind of chosen their compensation based on, I'm going to say the mean or the middle ground of that. So traditionally, Malahide Council hasn't been the highest paid or the lowest paid either. They kind of fall somewhere in between, but those have been decisions that have been made by council itself. This time, council thought it would be valuable to have members of the public provide their input and conduct the review on their behalf. There are some, traditionally there's been mixed opinions in terms of whether or not there should be more compensation, whether there should be less, and they were really anxious to be able to hear what some members of the public thought in the context.
Sure. Okay, thank you. All right. Oh, Martin?
Yeah, maybe, how did we kind of get here in the sense that there was some confusion, or there was a change in legislation, Ontario legislation, and then there was some confusion there, and then there was discussion about whether we should just, and I know some municipalities raised their pay just to cover off the taxes. Other municipalities didn't do that. I don't believe we did that. Could you fill us into kind of how we got here and why we
Certainly.
got here and what we did in that little piece of time?
So that particular part that you're referencing, previously, up until a couple of years ago, 1/3 of council's compensation, there was legislation that made 1/3 of council's compensation tax-free. So that was an additional perk, I guess, or incentive to encourage members of the public to be able to step forward. It also enabled the councils to have a little bit more take-home pay of their base salary, so that it actually resulted in less of a burden on the ratepayer. So if 1/3 of it ended up being tax-free, their net pay was a little bit more, so they didn't have to necessarily, if you wanted to ensure that council members had a certain net pay at the end, it didn't necessarily burden the taxpayers anymore. So that was one decision that was made. However, and I can't recall whether it's 2 or 3 years ago now, but a couple of years ago, the decision was made by the Revenue Canada that no longer, that 1/3 tax-free no longer applied. So what that meant was the council members, if you left their base salary the same, they actually received less money take home. So the base salary was the same and they got actually paid less. So there were a number of municipalities throughout Ontario that decided that they would increase council's base pay to enable them to be able to take home that same amount of money they had before. So if, for example, $20,000 was the base pay and councilors took home $15,000, this new tax-free portion meant that they actually took home $13,000. Then the decision was made to increase it to 22, so they would still get the 15. You know where I'm going. Those numbers are exact, but that's the philosophy behind it. So this particular council was concerned about increasing the base salary. And I don't want to speak to their exact motivation or thought process because I'm not familiar with all of it, but they were concerned about my understanding is they were concerned about burdening the taxpayers by having to increase their base salaries more. Then that meant more tax dollars had to be paid by the property tax people in order to allow them to have the same compensation. And there was mixed reviews. And so they decided at that point in time, after several meetings and several debates, that maybe it was time to look at their entire compensation package and come up with a new strategy and a new methodology to ensure that everybody was being paid appropriately and in comparison with our neighbors as well. So that's my Coles Notes version. The discussions took over a number of different meetings, both budget as well as council, but essentially that's what triggered the concern was the removal of the 1/3 tax-free provision that used to be in place.
Okay, then something tells me that we actually were ahead of the curve on that in doing the deductions on their pay. Is that correct? Or I'm trying to remember. I know there was a bit of unrest in there because something wasn't done 100% correctly. Is that true?
Well, I think there was a misunderstanding by some members of council when staff presented the report that said the removal of the 1/3 was going to take place. I don't believe there was a full comprehension or full explanation at that time that it was going to mean that their net pay was going to be different. And as well, because that was 1/3 tax-free, there were a couple of council members that when they added that additional taxable income onto their other full-time income that they had, it actually caused an even bigger issue because they had taxable income from a different source that when they added this amount on, it actually put them in a different tax bracket. And they actually had even less money take home than what some others would have been. But the decision that was made and the information that was provided to council members was based only on their money they received from the municipality. If they had taxable income from their own personal lives or from other sources, we're not aware of everyone's individual personal tax situation. But I know there was definitely some concerns from some members because it actually put them in a different taxable position and actually meant even less again, or they actually had to pay income tax because of their own other personal finances. But we don't, as staff and as the municipality, we don't have access to their personal income tax information. So there were some members that were very upset about that because it meant they actually, not only did they have less take-home pay, they actually had to pay income tax on it. And they would have maybe made a different decision if they had known the full implication in advance. But we don't know that as staff. So that's where I think some of the confusion came in previously.
Okay.
In members of council, it had little impact because they didn't have the same other type of personal income tax in place. So it affected every council member differently.
Okay, thanks.
Does that help?
That helps.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have another question. through your discussion, one of the things that I think you mentioned is that there has been other committees similar to this
Mhm.
discussing these same issues. And is there any do we have any access to those summaries, their conclusions or their recommendations that they made? If they're comparable in size and scope and stuff like that.
Yeah, and I can look at that. I believe that Central Elgin had such a committee. It was, I think, it was a few years ago.
Mhm.
Other committees that I'm familiar with, certainly the City of London regularly has a public committee that looks at these types of things. I mean, that's a different scope. But I can certainly take a look and see what I can find in terms of similar types of municipalities and these types of committees. They're not frequent, I'll say, but they're certainly not common either. But I can certainly pull that and get copies of their final reports, and that might give you some more information in terms of things to consider as you move forward, for sure.
Sure, just might save us some legwork.
Yeah, absolutely.
And reinventing the wheel, we don't need to do that either.
Exactly, exactly.
Any other questions for Michelle before we move on with the agenda? You okay for now? Just look at that agenda again. So I believe the next item on the agenda is the reference materials, and I'm not sure whether you want to go through any of those or make comments on some of those reference materials.
And I can just kind of give a little bit of an overview of each of them. I'm not going to, unless the members wish me to go through in more detail, I can just kind of tell you a little bit of the context behind them and where we pulled the information from and the reason why we've included them in your package, if that would be helpful. So the first item that's in is the current council remuneration bylaw, and council's salaries and remuneration are established through an actual formal process, a bylaw process. So that bylaw runs through all of the parameters. It sets the base salary. Let me just flip to that. So we've got the base salary set for all of the mayor, the deputy mayor, and the individual members of council. It does talk about in part 2 of that this remuneration covers all regular council and committee of the whole meetings. Does speak to the fact that there are per diems that are enabled to be paid for participation in work-related conferences and workshops. Does section 4 talks about an inflationary adjustment. So the same percentage increase that's granted to staff annually would be applied to this particular base salary, which is outlined in number 1. That's why you see the base salary is actually got a number of odd, like it ends in 12 cents for the 1 and stuff like that, as opposed to just a regular. But as you start to apply the percentage increases, that amount is adjusted accordingly. And the section 5 of that particular bylaw authorizes the treasurer to just automatically make those annual inflationary index adjustments without having to go back to council. Council is actually paid once a month, so they get 12 equal installments once a month. And because Malahide is very large geographically in comparison to some other more compact municipalities, each member of council is awarded an annual mileage allowance. So members of council don't have to track each individual kilometer and submit a receipt or submit an accounting on a monthly or bi-monthly basis to be able to get reimbursed for mileage. It was determined it was just easier to apply an amount. The mayor and the deputy mayor get a little bit more because, again, typically they attend more functions and so would do a little bit more traveling than individual members of council. That's not always the case, and different. I would suggest to you that probably each member probably has slightly different mileage as well, depending on where they reside, the types of committees they participate in, all of those things. But at this to date, council has determined that a flat fee was just easier to be able to administer and adjust accordingly. Section 8 talks about they get additional mileage on a per kilometer basis when they attend conferences and workshops outside of the municipality. And that mileage rate is 45 cents per kilometer. And then again, the Director of Finance is authorized to make those payments accordingly and go from there. So that's the current remuneration structure. If there's not any questions on that, I can move on to the next item, but I don't want to stop you if you have any questions.
My only question is for example, the mileage. In what we're looking at, can we actually recommend that it be per kilometer as opposed to, but I understand how a flat rate is that much easier. It's easier for everyone, I'm assuming.
Yep. And
we could recommend that they go to a per kilometer basis.
yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Just curious.
Yep.
Question, is there any other costs that they're burdened with? Because if they're using their own personal vehicle, does that affect, say, their insurance rates? The industry that I come from, it used to be that we would recommend that they take rental vehicles so that they weren't burdened with any additional costs or any other issues with using their own personal vehicle.
That I'm not sure of, quite honestly. That's something I can look into as to whether or not there would be any additional amounts. I know that the municipality has insurance that covers council members when they're essentially on duty. So when they're acting on behalf of the municipality, when they're undertaking councillor duties. We have not car insurance, but we of course have liability insurance and those and other types of things that way. I'm not sure whether or not using their personal vehicles for, you know, when they are undertaking councillor functions, whether that makes any difference or not. But that's something we could certainly inquire, and if it was necessary, that may be something that the committee would want to consider. You know, possibly another compensation factor to account for any increase in insurance or anything like that.
Okay.
Anything else before I move on to the next reference material?
Not for me.
So the next one is a comparison of different municipalities that have similar sized or similar geography. This particular survey was conducted in March of last year. So it is about a little over a year old, but I think it still gives you a pretty good idea of the levels of compensation and the types of things that other municipalities are doing. So most municipalities have a base pay for all of their positions. Some of them also pay an additional amount for any committee meeting attendance. And then you can see as well the different types of mileage reimbursement rates and the different per diem rates. And the last column in that references what Martin was asking about earlier about what action they took in regard to the removal of the 1/3 tax-free allowance. So some of them made some changes, some of them decided not to make any changes, and some of them are still pending as well, or were at the time this survey was undertaken. So that's just to give you some background and some additional information. There are a number of different municipalities there. If there were other municipalities that aren't included there that you think would be good comparators, or you'd be interested in us getting some additional information on, certainly we can undertake to do that. This is one that we thought was pretty comprehensive of similar types of municipalities and geographies. But if there are others, you could just let us know and we can reach out to those municipalities and see if we can get the same comparisons. Is there any questions on that chart or anything in that chart that I think it's fairly straightforward, but.
I take it we're going to come back to that at some point.
Yeah, and Madam Chair, through you, the purpose of today's discussion was to kind of give you a little bit of the background and the groundwork, try to determine whether we have sufficient information, and there's a couple of things we've asked for, and staff will go back and get that for you. But I think my thought for today was just to kind of give you all the background, allow you to absorb that a little bit more. Let us come, where there are gaps, we would go back and pull that information, and then maybe come back at the next meeting and actually start to dive into it a little bit more and hopefully at that point, we've got all of the information to go forward. But we can discuss a little bit next steps as we get further in the agenda. But yes, I would agree, Martin, that this is one we're probably going to have a lot more discussion about, because it talks about the different opportunities and as well what a lot of our comparables are doing. And I think those are some things that we need to definitely have more information on and take into consideration further. The next chart that's in your package is just a summary of our current committees that we have, as well as which members of council sit on those committees. And I apologize, I know it's a little bit small. There's a lot of information in there. And then also gives you an idea of what compensation is being paid right now. These may not be exact, but in the sense of the final dollar amounts and stuff, but it gives you a good baseline to be able to have some discussions on and to look at. So it identifies the entire compensation package and then how it's broken out into each individual committee or council member based on their attendance. You can see there's a number of committees where all members of council participate on, such as like the budget committee, and of course committee of adjustment, and as well the East Elgin Community Complex Board of Management. And then there are other committees where there's just 1 or 2 members that are appointed depending on the terms of reference of those committees and the need, essentially. Some members of council, because of other commitments, are only able to participate in a 1 or 2. Others have a much larger number. And again, there is no right or wrong answer for individual members. It's based on their availability, their time, their interests, and things like that. So you'll also see in the kind of the highlighted column the number of meetings per year. There are some committees that meet more than others, and again, those are the commitments that are being made and recognize the dollars amount for each individual member, and that's why they fluctuate so significantly, because not every committee meets monthly, not every member is on all committees and things like that. So again, that just gives you an idea of the distribution of council compensation and wages, and just a summary of the state, I guess, as is at the present. Any questions on that at all?
Yeah, so if we're coming across, we got the council, all the names, total members, number of meetings, pay per meeting, total pay. I understand, and I'm taking the top line. Now we move, there it says $80 per meeting. Now to the right of that, it says $100 per meeting.
Oh, yes, I apologize. I should have explained that. The council, this chart was prepared when council was discussing their review package to begin with. This was prepared by staff, and this was prepared as a summary to show if we were to look at establishing meeting pays and different amounts of meeting pays, what that would translate to in terms of annual increases. So I apologize, I didn't make that clear. So this is from the 2 highlighted columns in between that, in the sense of counselor attendance and what they're appointed to, that's the current state. The other 3 columns where they talk about the different wage amounts, that's if you were to establish a meeting pay at $80, this would be the net income on an annual, or the net amount on an annual basis. I'm sorry, I apologize for that. I didn't make that clear, but there were some scenarios because council was considering, prior to the establishment of this committee, was looking at their compensation package and was discussing whether or not they would establish a meeting pay in addition to their base salary. And here were some scenarios and some potential implications if they were to look at going down that path, depending on the amount that they decided for a meeting pay. At the end of the day, council decided not to proceed with that and actually decided to establish this committee. So those are some potential scenarios that would be implemented. Right now, as I mentioned, the base salary of council members is what it includes all of these items. So they don't get this meeting pay at present. This would be what it would translate to if any of those options were implemented. So my apologies.
Thank you.
That's why it's good to ask those questions, Martin. Thank you.
It's confused, but yeah, no, it makes sense.
Yeah,
now.
absolutely. Yeah. So I said, we've pulled together a number of these resources over a period of time as staff. So I failed to mention the context in that one. So, but big difference.
Yes, yeah.
And then the next item following that chart is the policy that talks about when council attends a convention or a seminar or a workshop essentially outside of the municipality. So it does talk about reimbursements for travel expenses and the policies that are in place there, indicating that, you know, registration fees and accommodation if it's required, a meal allowance, those types of things are all to be covered. And certain out of pockets. It does confirm that if a spouse is traveling with a member of council, none of their costs are able to be paid by the municipality. Talks about a per diem and those types of things. Use of private vehicles, as Richard had indicated, whether or not there was a vehicle that needed to be rented, you know, how we would reimburse for those types of expenses. So I'm not going to go through all of those areas, but certainly if there are questions that any members have, I can elaborate a little bit further. But those are some things, again, that's one of the policies that you need to think about in sense of overall compensation packages, whether there needs to be adjustments to any of those as well as you move forward.
Is there, can you give me a quick example of municipal business? Like, how is that different than going to a conference? I mean, I understand what a conference is, but is there another example? Because I believe attendance at conventions or conferences is sort of treated separately, correct? Or is it all the same? I just wanted
I'm
to
not
make
sure. I'm not sure the question. Sorry, I wasn't sure what you meant by a municipal function versus attendance at conferences. So a municipal function, for example, might be that you're invited to go to the City of London to bring greetings on behalf of council for some particular event or things like that. So there are things that aren't necessarily a seminar, a workshop, or a convention.
Right.
Council's asked to participate in, or it might be an economic development function of some sort that they're attending on behalf of Malahide.
Okay. No, that's good. I just wondered an example, and that's
Yeah,
great.
and functions that happen within the borders of Malahide are all considered to kind of be just, those are our regular council things. But even if you're asked to go to the St. Thomas Chamber of Commerce for a particular event, then you would have, and it took a full day, you would have the ability then to be able to get a per diem and those types of things. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Then the next item is code of conduct policy for council and local boards. I think this one actually, it's a long document. I won't argue that one. But it does lay out a little bit just in terms of accountability, conflict of interest, that, you know, improper use of influence, confidential information. It's a large document because it's intended to be for councilors primarily, but a number of the sections do apply to committee members as well. I don't necessarily have a lot of areas that I want to highlight for you today, but certainly if there's anything in there that you have any questions or concerns about, if you identify them, I can probably elaborate further, but I was not my intent to go through the entire document. It is lengthy, and it's intended to be just as a resource for just for information for members of council, or sorry, for members of the committee, and also gives you a little bit more background too in terms of some of the responsibilities of council members during the course of their regular duties.
Yes, yeah, I don't think we need to go through that line by line. It is, I skated through, I actually read the whole thing through when we initially were going to do this, and then I kind of reviewed it here recently, and it certainly puts some of the magnitude on all of the requirement, not just us, but it actually what the council required to do, because that's what, when we're talking about the council.
Exactly. And I think that was the point that I mentioned about the terms of reference, about the actual responsibilities and accountabilities. And it isn't, being a member of council just isn't about attending a meeting twice a month and you know, listening to discussions. There's a lot more to it, a lot more things that council members need to be aware of, need to take into consideration in performing their duties. And I think that more so in the last number of years as well, the province has continued to develop these policies and these protocols. And it is somewhat onerous at times for members of council, and you know, ensures that, you know, anybody coming into wanting to run as member of council, these are things that they all need to take into consideration when they're making their decisions. It isn't quite as simple as it was 30 years ago when I first got into this business. There were very less less, you know, it wasn't that the responsibilities were any less, but they certainly weren't defined the same way as they are right now. So I think you're right, Martin. It does put things in a little bit of a different context when you see the full picture of some of the responsibilities and that are put on members of council.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks.
And because that's a big document, bear with me while I scroll through to get to the bottom. And then the last item that I have here is the AMCTO, which is the Association of Municipal Managers, Clerks and Treasurers of Ontario. It's an organization that has been established for about 80 years that deals primarily with municipal staff functions. But they, in 2018, they conducted their own survey of municipal council compensation in Ontario. And I've included in your agenda package a copy of their final report. It too talks a lot about a number of things that is essentially the same situation we're in right now, where councils have started to wonder, you know, are the compensation packages appropriate? How do they compare? Is there consistencies and similarities between different size municipalities, urban versus rural, and those types of things? So this is just another resource and a reference for you. I think there is some good information in there and some things to consider in terms of what others are doing, and gives us some more, just another resource to be able to take into consideration. It is interesting with some of the statistics that they've done in the sense of sources of revenue and just how the compensation is typically done, lower tier, upper tier, different countries and things like that, as well as in Ontario. So again, it wasn't my intention to go through the entire document, but I thought that it may be useful to you as you start to look at your deliberations. And you can see trends between the different population size of municipalities, as well as whether they're upper or lower tier, and even also in terms of geographic area. So Southwestern Ontario has some different trends than Northern Ontario, for example, and things like that. So. And Madam Chair, I think with that, that was all I was planning to be able to go through at this point in time with the committee. But certainly if there are questions, or if there are additional things you think that might make it easier for you to do your job, some additional resources that you would like us to do, Diana's been jotting down the suggestions already. But if there's other things, I would be pleased to report back to you on those and distribute those to you to be able to assist in your deliberations.
Okay. Does anyone have additional resources that at this time that we think staff can provide? I think we have a good basis to start, that's for sure.
And just say, one of the things that I understand through the process that we're going through, one of the things that's critical in doing any wage review or wage benefit review is, number one, is the roles and responsibilities. And With counselors, my understanding is that the roles and responsibilities are established for them by the province of Ontario. So essentially, the roles and responsibilities are the same for every counselor, no matter where they are in Ontario, at least. And so if there's compensation differences, it shouldn't be based on roles and responsibilities. There's understanding what the differences are when we're looking at comparable communities, whether they're sizes or whatever, the area that they're in or the populations or whatever. Those are the differences that could create, to me anyway, a difference in the wage and benefits that they receive. And I just want to be clear that that is right, that the roles and responsibilities are established by the province of Ontario, not by the councillors or the municipalities themselves.
And through you, Madam Chair, that is correct. And actually, that's one thing that I will add to your, I'll get sent out to you. There is a section in the Municipal Act that very clearly defines the roles and responsibilities, not only just individual members of council, but also the mayor as the head of council has some additional responsibilities that the other members of council don't have. So I will definitely pull that out, but you're absolutely right. The base roles and responsibilities are established by the province, and every member of council, regardless of whether or not it's a municipality of 3,000 or a municipality of 300,000, have the same roles and responsibilities. How they deliver them and the time commitments required to deliver them are sometimes slightly different. And again, that's a lot to do with size, because as you're aware, there are municipalities that have full-time members of council. And then of course there are part-time members of council. And a lot of that is reflective and dependent on size and geography and those types of things, which again, when we talked about the terms of reference, recognize that we need to give consideration to our local area and salaries and wages of our local area when we look at the entire compensation format and package. Because
yes, I think that's the important part, is that we're comparing apples to apples. There's no use looking at a place like Toronto, you know, when we're looking at it, but we need to compare it to this, like I say, similar sizes, areas and stuff like that.
Right, which again is when we've prepared that survey of that chart, other local municipalities, they
Right.
are very similar sized and similar geography as well. Yeah.
Okay.
All right, are we ready to move on? I believe the next item on the agenda is to actually set the next committee meeting. Is that anything else, Michelle, or can we move ahead to set our next meeting?
Nope, I think that would be appropriate. The only other item, and Martin had questioned it about coming back to some of these things. So I guess all I wanted to double check to make sure that you didn't actually want to start deliberations today, that you were comfortable with just having had this kind of introduction and this dialogue and review of some of the information, and that you're comfortable with just holding off on the actual discussion and debate on specifics until the next meeting. That was my idea, but again, if the committee had a different idea, I don't want to shut you down either in that sense, if you wanted to actually get into the meat of the matter at this point in time.
One thought I had is that we talked about part-time, and I think just something we can think about between now and the next meeting. A lot of times I do the better thinking in the off time than I do in front of the crowd. But how much of a part-time job is it? I think that, you know, is it 10% of a living wage, or is it 50%, or is it 80%, or is, I think that's going to be an important question that this council, or this committee rather, is going to come up with.
That's a good question. I don't have the answers to that, but what I can do, if it would be helpful, is I can survey our existing members of council and get them to give us just even a rough guideline of how many hours, you know, per week or per month that they think that they, you know, that they put forward. I won't necessarily identify each and every individual, but we can come up with a scope in the sense that, you know, it's 15 hours a week for this member of council. This member of council is 25 hours, whatever the case may be. I can give you some
That'd be
base
great.
information if that would be helpful. Sure.
Michelle, I'd like to suggest too that we, if at all possible, to keep the names out of it as you suggested.
Yeah.
And because when we're doing this, we're reviewing a counselor's role and responsibility, not a person or an individual or a name. And because those could change many times over the coming years.
Absolutely. The only one that I will have to identify is probably the mayor and the deputy mayor, because they sit on county council as well. They have different roles and responsibilities, and of course their workload absolutely is greater than the average member of council. So we will identify those positions, and by default you're going to know who they are, but I think you'll be able to see it's very justified as well because they do sit on the two organizations.
Yeah, that's not an issue. We're talking once again about a position, not about the person that's in that.
Exactly. Yeah.
Position. Okay.
Yep.
Well, I'm fine with that.
Yeah, no, we will pull that together. I will survey them and we'll get that information together as well. If there is, as Martin indicated, sometimes we do think of things after the fact. If there are other items or other questions that you think of after we adjourn this meeting that you think would be beneficial or helpful for us to get together, or for me to pull some more information or get some answers, let me know. Just send me a quick email or give me a telephone call, and then we can add that information to and make sure that we've got as much data for you to be able to analyze and assess for the next meeting. Don't feel like you have to wait till the next meeting and then bring it forward. I'm more than happy to be able to pull together whatever we can. And it might be that for whatever reason, we might not have all of the information ready for the next meeting, but we will certainly continue to acquire it as we move forward and give you as complete a picture as we can.
Yeah, I do have one other question, I guess it is, and I don't remember reading this anywhere in the roles and responsibilities for a counselor or a mayor or whatever, but is there any expectations that are outlined for them that says, you know, what would be a reasonable amount of hours that they should be putting into the role, you know, that they're assuming? You know, should they be looking at when they step into something like that, you know, 20 hours a month, 40 hours a month, 100 hours a month? Is there something as a baseline that they would go by, or we could go by?
Yeah, unfortunately, there's not anything like that. I can tell you from, like I said, I've been in this business for more than 30 years and worked with lots of different councils and council members. It fluctuates significantly based on the type of municipality, based on whether or not they're also part of county council or not. And there are some local council members that, in my past, I'm not talking the current one, but there are members that simply only attend their regular council meetings. They read their agenda, they answer, you know, some telephone calls with, you know, very base amount. And then there are other ones that, regardless of the compensation they're paid, they feel very strong themselves on a personal level that they're going to put 110% in, and they may work a 35 or a 40-hour week just based on, you know, doing council functions. And unfortunately, there is no right or wrong. And it is very much how the individual decides to interpret. I mean, of course, we know that there are council meetings, and I can tell you that the average council meeting probably takes 2 hours, and you know, they have 20 of them a year, so you can go there, and it maybe takes an hour on average to review the agenda package ahead of time, you know, and you can start to do a little bit of analysis that way. But it's very difficult because we also don't know how many telephone calls they get from different residents on different issues. I would argue that they probably vary even from different parts of Malahide. There are certain areas that people might make more telephone calls than others. There might be more issue, might be a time of year. It might be there's a construction project going on and people are a little more concerned about certain things, or there might be some aspect of the community that takes more of a focus at that point in time. And then a couple months later, that's resolved and there is, so it's really difficult to be able to say. My suggestion when a new candidate comes forward and says, I'm thinking about running for council, but I want to know roughly how much of a time commitment it'll be. My suggestion to them is always to reach out to the incumbent and have that candid discussion with them, because they will give a better idea of the types of questions, the types of issues that their constituents have outside of the normal. I can tell them we have 20 meetings a year and they roughly take 2 hours and there's roughly an hour and a half of agenda preparation time, but it's all those other things that happen in between. And again, if an extra member of council, or if a member of council chooses to participate in 6 committees versus 1 committee, and you know, that's those 6 committees all meet monthly, then that's a bigger time commitment. Or 1 committee meets quarterly, that's a different time commitment. So it's really very, very difficult to come up with a standard and a base. And I've been asked that question lots of times, particularly by people who are thinking about running for council and want to know, can that actually fit in their, you know, with their personal life? And you know, they don't want to step forward as was said, you know, when Susan mentioned, well, what does chair mean and how many extra hours is that going to be? You know, everyone needs to have an idea. You want to make sure you do it right and that you can do a good job, but it also has to fit in with the rest of your personal life. So some members do a lot, some members not as much for different reasons.
I think that's where it's important to that survey you mentioned of current council members. I think that will really help us, because there could be a variety right there, but it might give us a sense of what our current council, the amount of time that they are investing in it. So that would be really helpful.
Yeah, and I think what I'll do with that survey, sorry to interject there, I think what I'll also ask in the context of that is whether or not you work full-time in another job, because I think that makes a difference as well in terms of availability and responsibilities. So I will include that as well in the questionnaire.
Richard, did you have another question?
No, I was just looking at it and saying, you know, if we had at least some sort of an idea of what a base amount of time would be, you know, for the person that's just coming in and starting to do the job is different than the person that's been in it for several years that has maybe assumed other roles. Can you compare it even to a minimum wage requirement? How does it compare it to something like that? I'm just looking at something that you can look back at and say, you know, are they making minimum wage for the hours they're putting in? It's just a question.
Yeah. Good point.
I just want to question the, whatever the mayor and deputy mayor do, they do for Malahide, but they are also paid by Elgin County, is that correct? And so
yes, correct.
They need to keep that side of it sort of, I know it's going to overlap, but they certainly need to, we're asking them what they're doing for Malahide, so we need to be clear that they're not including their council or their Elgin County tasks.
Yes, that's a great point. And while you're right, they have certain responsibilities at that. The mayor and the deputy mayor traditionally have more responsibilities in Malahide as well. And things like ceremonial events and as I mentioned in one other example, bringing greetings on behalf of the municipality. And if the mayor is tied up on another meeting, the deputy mayor typically is the one that fills in for him in a number of those areas. So as I said, they typically have more of those types of ceremonial functions and events, and therefore put in a larger number of hours, even in Malahide outside of the responsibilities of county council. But yes, there is definitely a difference for sure.
Good.
Okay, so are we ready to set a date for next meeting?
That might be the hardest part of the whole agenda, Madam Chair.
Maybe I could start by saying, is there a preferred day or time of day that works? I kind of know Kevin's schedule, although lately it's been all over the place, but I'll touch base with him later.
This is a good time of the day for me.
And Martin?
I can usually make this work. Got good staff here, so I turn the phone down and tell them that I'm out of orbit for an hour and a half, and so
Yeah.
And Tuesday, the day works? I just
Sure.
have to look at the calendar here. Just to let Martin and Richard know, I supervise a couple of libraries in the east end of the county, part of the Elgin County Library System. I do work full time. Meetings during the day are kind of tricky for me. I can, depending on the frequency, I can see about making arrangements. My schedule is kind of difficult now because I've also been redeployed to help at long-term care homes. This is because of the pandemic. But I'm also transitioning back to the library because we're getting library services going, not in a limited way. So right now I'm kind of back and forth between them. I think perhaps a Tuesday morning I can, is this appropriate for you, Michelle? I should ask.
Yep, no, this Tuesday mornings is fine. That's not a problem for us.
Yeah, I mean, typically I would be working on Tuesday mornings. I'm thinking that perhaps if I adjust my schedule for the next little while, I guess where I'm hedging is once we kind of get to more full-time hours at the library, Tuesday morning might be difficult. Is it possible to just kind of, you know, if we could.
One at a time? Absolutely.
One at a
Yeah.
time. It would be nice to actually kind of set a regular meeting time and day is ideal as far as I'm concerned. At this point, I think it's going to have to be one at a time for me until I know what my hours, when we're opening back to regular hours at the library. That may not happen for a little while yet.
Why don't you give us a time that works for you then? You have the, I guess, a stricter schedule or whatever.
Right.
Give
And
us
Martin, you were.
My question is, what's our you know, are we looking towards a once a week, once a month? Like how
Yeah.
how soon or how quick, or what are we trying to achieve here?
Yeah, my suggestion, if I may jump in, Madam Chair, would be maybe for the first couple of meetings, as we really have some more discussion rather than coming up with necessarily decisions, you may want to think about bi-weekly, so every 2 weeks. That gives staff an opportunity to be able to go away, pull together some of that information that you're looking for, consolidate some of the additional information. And like, for example, we're going to go and survey members of council and stuff, and that might take a little bit to be able to do. My suggestion, if Tuesday morning for the moment works,
July 28th.
would be looking at the 28th, if that is, if that's acceptable to everyone. I know it is a little bit challenging in the summer, and I know everyone, you know, is schedules kind of change, but if we could set that one, if that's okay with everyone, then that gives me a chance to be able to pull the rest of the information together, and then we can see. It might be that you only need 3 or 4 meetings to be able to actually get to a summary or a decision. It might mean that we have 5 or 6. There is no right or wrong again. It's just a matter of making sure that we've got the information that we need, and 2 weeks gives us time to think about it in between. And even yourselves, you may actually want to reach out to a member of council or even somebody else and talk a little bit more about their roles and responsibilities. There is no, you know, like I said, you guys can do your own research outside of staff too, and that gives you a chance to have some of those conversations too, if you need to.
Okay. So yes, I think that's a good idea. Perhaps Tuesday, July 28th at 10 o'clock again.
Yeah, that works for me. I know that Diana's on vacation that week, but that's okay because I can do the minutes or get another staff member to assist if we need to.
Okay. And are the others willing to, and I know I said I was going to do one at a time. Maybe I should leave it one at a time. I'm always tempted to kind of book it in advance so I know what's happening. The 2 weeks from that would then be August 11. I don't know if we want to do that. Again, I'm not sure what my hours at the library are going to be. We could tentatively set
Yeah.
on Tuesday, August 11.
We could book that as well, and that would be fine with me. That works with my schedule if it works with the others. And then if it turns out we need to make a change, then we can certainly, we can do another poll and see what works for everyone. But if that, that gives us a couple of dates that we can kind of strive towards, and then we can see where we go from there.
Okay. So
I
we'll
could
set
work with the 11th as well, I think, at this point, so.
Okay, well then, staff will send out a meeting invite, and again, I will send out I think for the 28th, if you're comfortable with it, I would like to continue with the Zoom meeting, only because we haven't got our facilities set up yet for in-person meetings. So if that's okay, and then I'll know a little bit better by August 11th where we're at that point. But things are still pretty new with moving to stage 3. We haven't got all of our processes in place yet. So.
Okay. I do have to sort of rush off if that
Yep.
is everything. Do we
No.
need a motion?
A motion to adjourn then, that would be
So if
great.
I could have a motion to adjourn, Martin,
Yep.
and seconder,
I'll second it.
Richard, all in favor? Okay,
All right, I'll put together this information. We'll meet back same place on the 28th then. Wonderful.
sounds
Thank you
Thank you
wonderful.
all for your time this morning.
Everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.